He asked me if I were familiar with the history of the great American tumbleweed. Huh? I say. He says, oh, Will, come on. Rolling along with the rolling tumbleweed. And I said, no. He says, well, the tumbleweed came to the United States quite by accident. It was known as the Siberian or Russian thistle. And they brought it over here, the seeds, to feed the cattle. And then the cattle defecated the seeds and provided good fertilizer, and that was the tumbleweed. And now it's a pest. Dune began as a series of articles for California Living about how the dryland ecologists were attempting to stop the desert, the sands, from going over the roads in Oregon and in Washington, in Oregon in particular. He said there ought to be a novel there somewhere. Originally, the hero of Dune was going to be Pardit Keen's the planetary ecologist, who was going to remake the surface of this planet by teaching them plantings and so on.
Drives them into a killing frenzy.
The imperial ecologist, my lord, Dr. Kine.
We prefer the traditional term planetologist.
That didn't go too far, because what conflict do you have by teaching people how to plant trees or desert grasses? Dune was originally going to be placed on Mars, but he discarded the idea immediately because Mars had been patented by Bradbury and Clark and Edgar Rice Burroughs and others. So he then created a planet.
Arrakis, Dune, home of the spice.
What we have here is a desert planet. That desert planet is a part of an archetypal myth, the wasteland myth. Everybody in the world has written about the wasteland myth. T.S. Eliot wrote about the wasteland myth, and on and on and on and on and on. And Frank is writing about the wasteland myth, which is awaiting a redeemer, a savior. And in various forms of the wasteland myth, you have the country being saved in one way or another. In one sense, we could say that the Judeo-Christian world was a wasteland prior to the coming of Jesus. After the fall, it was a wasteland, waiting the Redeemer. And it's the archetypal thing. So we have here awaiting a savior. Paul Atreides, the off-worlder, becomes the savior. The dark side of our nature occurs. And Herbert, as a Jungian, was well aware of what Jung called the shadow. And so, if he is dealing here with the shadow aspect of our society and the back end of it, so to speak, the good guys are the Fremen. The bad guys are corporate capitalistic society in a certain sense, as represented by the great houses of the Harkonnens and their allies, who deliberately rape the planet Arrakis for its sole, its sole commodity, exactly, the life-giving spice. And if you want to read that as a muted metaphor about oil, go right ahead, because Arrakis sounds like Iraq. And spice, oil, Redeemer, Lawrence of Arabia, who was very flawed as well. Consider that parallel. And he knew it. And it was part of his unconscious or conscious as he was writing it.
Spies! That's what you are. Spies for the Fremen scum. Fremen scum who raid my spice warehouses. Who destroy royal equipment.
No. We are poor. We have no weapons.
He was trying to dispose of this.
When a people had been put down for centuries under the most austere conditions, under the most extreme conditions, what recourse do they have? You can choose the recourse that Martin Luther King did, of total nonviolence, which was successful. Or you can you choose the recourse that, let's say, the Catholics in Northern Ireland have, or the Protestants in Northern Ireland have, where they've chosen violence. Either side, both sides. So these are conflicting forces, and Herbert is writing about those conflicting forces.
You say I am the Mahdi. I say I am your dupe. And it's time now to wipe Arrakis clean of the awful Harkonnen stench. Time to drive their name into the depths of hell, so that we may reclaim the planet and create a paradise together!
Paul Atreides, the off-worlder, becomes the savior. And the conditions on the planet are so bad that he must use as his methods of redemption, not the traditional ones of love, mercy, justice, compassion, etc., that were used by the traditional messiahs, if you please. But he is forced to choose violence as his method of redeeming the Fremen. There's a strong similarities between the Beowulf and Dune, by the way, because you have dragons guarding gold. Dragons, fire-breathing dragons. What about the Shai-Hulud, the monsters there? Well, my goodness. What do they guard? They guard the spice sands. But where does the spice come from? Have you worked it out in the book? Has anyone really worked it out? I'll tell you, I'll cut it short. The spice is probably the spermatic material of Shai-Hulud itself, or himself. Old Father Eternity, as they call him. And so they're going to guard their eggs.
What are they doing?
He read book after book after book. He told me dozens and dozens of histories of Islam. He read the Quran in translation. He learned about 400 words of Arabic, so that the Arabic terms which he used in Dune would be relatively accurate, although modified. The term Sharia, for example, being the Islamic law, and he uses that. And that's the kind of thing that he used. But that was the attraction of the Middle East, was primarily as artistic source material.
The Padishah Emperor is here, in the space above us, with his favorite truth-sayer and legions of his Sardaukar.
I think that Frank's deep-seated beliefs in a supreme deity, however incarnated, but basically became incarnated in the God spirit or soul of each individual person. And He quoted once, yes, I believe it was Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, which he quoted, that the great commandment ought to be, thou shalt not disfigure the soul. I found him immensely entertaining as a person, immensely generous as a person, extremely interested in almost any aspect of what is going on in the world. You might not know that he at one time had been a professional photographer. He flew his own airplane. He was a wine buff. He learned to make some of his own wine. He and I had almost a running joke. Every time I saw him, I'd bring him a bottle of wine and see if he knew about it. He had a wine cellar outside his home up there in Washington, Port Townsend, that had 5,000 bottles or more of wine. And he'd learned to make wine from the great Maynard Amarine of UC Sacramento, who was the great wine enologist of our time. And he'd interviewed Amarine for his various articles, and so he learned about wine. He and I had a good personal relationship, too. I stayed in his home often. He stayed in my home often. He spoke here at the university. I miss him.